Have you ever wondered what Americans used to eat when money was tight, ingredients were scarce, and every meal had to stretch across hungry mouths? In the kitchens of the Great Depression, survival wasn't just about food, it was about ingenuity, resourcefulness, and the love packed into every humble plate. These meals weren't fancy. They weren't flashy. But they were real. They were warm. And they kept entire families going through some of the hardest years in American history. In this next chapter of our journey, we're peeling back the pages of forgotten cookbooks and uncovering the dinners that once defined an era, dishes made with pennies, patience, and pure grit. From makeshift stews to meatless miracles, every recipe tells a story. A story of a mother making do with a single onion. A grandfather stretching beans in cornbread to feed six. These aren't just recipes, they're memories, survival tactics, and time capsules. So grab your apron and maybe a tissue, because these next dinners will stir something deeper than just hunger. Let's dive into the forgotten flavors that fed a nation when hope was low, but hearts were full. 01. Cabbage and Noodles, the meal that hugged back. In the heart of the Great Depression, comfort was a luxury most couldn't afford. But somehow, in the humblest kitchens, a steaming skillet of cabbage and noodles could feel like a warm embrace. This dish, also known as haluski in some immigrant communities, was more than a meal. It was a survival tactic passed down from Eastern European mothers to their American daughters. And in those bleak 1930s winters, it became a staple across coal towns, factory cities, and farming communities. With just 3 ingredients, egg noodles, butter, and green cabbage, families could turn the cheapest produce into a belly-filling dinner. If you were lucky, a sprinkle of black pepper or some bacon grease added a smoky twist. But most nights, it was just about stretching what little you had. You'd start by slicing the cabbage thin and letting it caramelize slowly in a cast-iron pan, the edges crisping in brown butter. Then came the noodles, boiled just enough, tossed in, and left to soak up every bit of savory flavor. The whole house would smell like roasted sweetness and buttery toast. In a time when meat was scarce and money tighter than ever, this dish offered more than calories. It brought people together. Kids huddled around chipped plates. Dads came in from long days at work sites. And somehow, with this simple, soft, salty sweet combo, it felt like hope. Cabbage and noodles weren't glamorous, but they were honest. Reliable. Warm. The kind of food that made you forget, for a moment, that the world outside your window was crumbling. And today, when you make it, you're not just cooking, you're reviving a dish that kept America standing. Let's keep going. Because the next recipe? It's a forgotten classic made entirely from potato peels, and it's going to surprise you. 02. Potato peel croquettes, turning scraps into survival. In the darkest years of the Great Depression, nothing went to waste. Not a crust. Not a drop. And especially, not a single potato peel. That's how potato peel croquettes were born. What many today would toss in the trash, 1930s families transformed into golden, crispy bites of ingenuity. It wasn't just about being resourceful. It was about survival and dignity in the face of scarcity. Picture this, a tired mother scraping together a dinner for 5 with barely a penny in her pocket. All she had were the peels left from the night before. Instead of tossing them, she boiled them gently, mashed them with whatever fat was on hand, bacon grease, drippings, maybe even a touch of margarine, and stirred in a bit of flour, onion, salt, and the rarest ingredient of all, hope. She'd form the mixture into little patties, press them flat, and fry them until the edges turned crisp and brown. The result? A savory, soft-centered croquette with a crunch so satisfying, it could hush even the hungriest child. These croquettes weren't fancy. But when served hot with a smear of mustard or leftover gravy, they tasted like something special, like triumph in a skillet. This dish tells a story of mothers who refused to let their families go hungry. Of kids who licked plates clean and asked for more. of American resilience, fried golden on both sides. We might never know the names of the women who first crafted these potato peel miracles. But their spirit lives on every time someone chooses to cook with care, waste less, and feed with love. And up next? A jar of something tangy, sweet, and shelf-stable, a forgotten pickle recipe that once saved entire pantries from going empty. 03. Bread and butter pickles, the sweet and sour secret of survival. At first glance, they look like simple pickles, bright green slices floating in sweet brine. But during the Great Depression, bread and butter pickles were far more than just a sandwich topping. They were a symbol of thrift, preservation, and ingenuity in the American kitchen. Their origin? Likely a farmhouse in the Midwest, where produce was plenty in summer but preservation was the real art. These pickles got their name because they were often served between slices of bread with a smear of butter, a quick, cheap meal when meat was scarce and money was tighter than ever. Families would gather up the last of their cucumbers from the garden, slice them thin, and layer them with onions in a large crock. Then came the brine, a mix of vinegar, sugar, mustard seeds, turmeric, and celery seeds. It was boiled, poured over the mixture, and sealed in jars that lined pantry shelves like little jars of sunshine, waiting for winter. But here's the beauty: these pickles lasted. They didn't spoil. They brought flavor and crunch to otherwise bland meals. A spoonful could turn cold beans into a picnic, or stretch the same meat loaf into 2 more meals. Bread and butter pickles weren't just food. They were the result of mothers, grandmothers, and even children working together to stretch the harvest and make do. They tasted sweet, but behind every bite was a silent struggle and a quiet victory. Even today, when we crack open a jar and smell that sweet sour tang, we're tapping into a tradition of resilience. A reminder that sometimes, the humblest food tells the loudest story. Coming up next? A dish born from canned meat and wartime rations, crisped in a frying pan to feed whole families, and it still holds up today. You won't believe how corned beef hash patties saved dinner tables across the nation. 04. Corned beef hash patties, crispy survival on a skillet. There's something deeply comforting about the sound of sizzling in a cast iron pan. During the Great Depression and World War II, that sound often meant one thing: corned beef hash patties were on the menu, a meal built from scraps, but made with heart. Canned corned beef was a wartime staple, shipped to soldiers overseas and stacked on pantry shelves back home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. And when money was tight, this pink, salty meat became the backbone of many family dinners. The secret was in the stretch. A single can could be combined with mashed potatoes, chopped onions, and maybe a handful of breadcrumbs, whatever was on hand. This mixture was formed into small patties, flattened just right, then fried until golden and crisp on the outside, soft and savory inside. And here's what made it special: it felt like more than it was. Served hot with gravy or a fried egg, it tasted like care. It turned a little into enough. These patties could be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and often were. In boarding houses, farm kitchens, and tenement flats, the smell of corned beef patties frying meant everyone was gathering around the table. It wasn't a feast, but it brought people together. It brought comfort. It brought survival with flavor. Today, you'll still find versions of corned beef hash on diner menus, but few know how deep its roots go. This dish carried working-class families through the hardest times with just a few pantry staples and a hot skillet. So next time you open a can of corned beef, remember, it's not just a recipe. It's a story of scraping by, of making do, and of frying up hope one patty at a time. Up next, a suspiciously cheerful dish with a strange name and a shockingly vintage twist: the Sunshine Salad Surprise. You have to see to believe. 05. Sunshine Salad Surprise, the Jell-O mystery on every 1940s table. At first glance, it looked innocent, a cheerful ring of wobbly lemon Jell-O glistening like a summer afternoon. But take one bite, and you'd realize, Sunshine Salad Surprise wasn't just a dessert, it was a challenge. This mid-century marvel was the brainchild of wartime homemakers who had to get really creative. Fresh produce was scarce, refrigeration was limited, and sugar was rationed. So they turned to one of the most versatile inventions of the 20th century, powdered gelatin. Into that shimmering mold went grated carrots, crushed pineapple, chopped celery, and sometimes even diced green peppers. Yes, vegetables in Jell-O. The result? A strange but oddly refreshing salad that confused children and impressed dinner guests alike. You see, during World War II, presentation mattered. Housewives were expected to serve food that was both economical and eye-catching. And nothing said festive quite like a molded salad that jiggled when you passed it. Bonus points if you served it on a bed of iceberg lettuce with a dollop of mayonnaise or cottage cheese on top. Sunshine Salad Surprise wasn't just about flavor, it was about morale. Bright colors, weird textures, and strange combinations made people smile when the world outside felt uncertain. It was a moment of levity in a time of sacrifice. And here's the kicker, people loved it. It showed up at potlucks, church picnics, and school lunches. It was as much a cultural moment as it was a recipe, proof that even during rations and restrictions, creativity found a way to shine. Today, the idea of carrots and pineapple suspended in lemon gelatin might sound like a dare. But back then, it was a proud symbol of thrift and ingenuity. Coming up next, we take things back to the garden. But not just any garden, it's the backyard secret weapon of the war years, the humble dandelion green fritters that turned weeds into wartime gold. 06. Dandelion green fritters, weeds turned to gold. Imagine walking out into your backyard, basket in hand, and instead of picking vegetables from a garden, you're harvesting weeds. That's exactly what thousands of American families did during the Great Depression and wartime shortages, and those so-called weeds? They became dandelion green fritters. It was a dish born from desperation but crafted with quiet brilliance. Dandelions were free, abundant, and packed with nutrition. Grandmothers taught their grandchildren how to pick the tender young leaves before they turned bitter, usually early in spring. Back then, every yard was a pantry. Every patch of green was possibility. Once cleaned and chopped, the greens were mixed with a batter of flour, egg, maybe a little milk or water, whatever could be spared, and seasoned with salt and a pinch of pepper. Then, spoonfuls were dropped into hot oil or lard sizzling in a cast iron pan. The edges turned golden, crispy. The insides? Soft, slightly earthy, with a flavor that whispered of spinach and survival. These fritters weren't just food. They were a victory against hunger. A mother's way of saying, "We'll make it through this." In small farm towns and inner-city tenements alike, dandelion greens were a saving grace. Often served with a bit of vinegar or onion relish on the side, they gave poor families a sense of dignity, a sense of enough. And more importantly, they taught a generation that the world around them could nourish if you only knew where to look. We may not look twice at dandelions today, brushing them off as nuisances. But in the 1930s and 40s, they were survival wrapped in sunshine petals. Coming up next, we're diving into a dish that turned the ends of loaves into legends. Don't blink, because bread crust pudding is about to make you rethink every scrap you've ever thrown away. 07. Bread crust pudding, nothing wasted, everything loved. You know those dry, forgotten ends of the bread loaf, the ones we throw away without a second thought? In the heart of the Depression, those crusts were never trash. They were the base of something sacred. Bread crust pudding, the dessert that proved even the scraps held sweetness. Back then, wasting food wasn't just frowned upon, it was unthinkable. Families stretched every crumb, every drop of milk, and every egg to feed growing children and tired workers. When the bread started to go stale, that was a sign to begin the pudding. Mothers would soak crusts in scalded milk, often sweetened with just a hint of molasses or a spoon of sugar if they were lucky. Some added beaten eggs, a pinch of cinnamon, and maybe a handful of raisins if a neighbor had any to spare. It was all poured into a baking tin and slid into a warm oven until golden and set. The result? A soft, custardy center with caramelized edges. Every bite was a reminder that love doesn't need luxury, it just needs care. In the poorest of homes, bread crust pudding was often the only dessert children tasted all week. And it tasted like hope. This dish traveled from coal towns in Pennsylvania to the dust-worn plains of Oklahoma. It was a mother's quiet genius turning kitchen rejects into comfort. Many families passed their versions down like heirlooms, each one slightly different, but the heart of the recipe always the same: don't waste what you can turn into warmth. Today, we toss the crusts. But they once built a dessert that warmed entire generations. Up next, hold on tight, because we're cracking open a dish made entirely of bones, broth, and resourceful dreams. Ham bone soup is next, and it has a story that sticks to your ribs and your heart. 08. Depression-era corn fritters, crispy coins of survival. In the darkest years of the 1930s, one sound could lift spirits in the leanest kitchens: the soft sizzle of batter hitting hot fat. That sound meant corn fritters were on the way, and for struggling families across America, it was a small joy wrapped in a golden crunch. Corn fritters weren't new, but during the Great Depression, they became a staple survival food, especially in the rural South and Midwest. Canned corn was cheap, shelf-stable, and could be stretched with flour, eggs, and water into something hearty. If fresh corn was in season, even better. It was about making the most of what little you had and transforming it into something that felt like a treat. Mothers would mix together the corn with flour, baking powder, and just enough egg to bind it all. Some added diced onion or dried herbs when available. The mixture was spooned into sizzling lard or bacon grease and fried until crisp on the outside, soft and sweet within. No deep fryer, no fancy tools, just a cast iron pan and a careful eye. The fritters could be eaten on their own, dunked in tomato soup, or served beside wilted greens. Some dusted them with sugar and called it dessert. Others drizzled with leftover syrup or molasses if they were lucky enough to have it. And let's not forget, these fritters weren't just food. They were a way to feed a crowd, to stretch a single can of corn across a whole table. In hobo camps, church kitchens, and boarding houses, corn fritters became a symbol of resourcefulness and dignity in hard times. Today, they may seem simple. But back then, they were gold, crispy little coins of hope fried in hardship and served with love. Next, we'll explore a curious canned concoction that became a Depression delicacy. Get ready for the story behind spaghetti with ketchup and onion, the poor man's pasta surprise. And that's just one bite from the forgotten table of America's past. These recipes weren't just meals, they were lifelines, crafted with courage and care when every scrap mattered. If these stories stirred something in you, subscribe for more lost flavors, hidden cookbooks, and the forgotten meals that fed generations. Until next time, keep the skillet warm and the memories simmering.